You think your growth is freedom, but it silently threatens specific people. They do not fear your power, they fear losing control of it. If your weakness disappears, their hidden influence over you also starts breaking. There is a quiet rule in human behavior: dependence always protects the controller. When you stay unsure, confused, or guilty, someone nearby gains psychological stability from you. They feel useful when you are lost, they feel powerful when you are small. Your growth does not just change you, it destroys the role they built around you. Some people secretly organize their identity around your weakness. They are the helper, the advisor, the rescuer, the logical one, the stronger one. Their mind writes a script where you are always slightly below, emotionally or mentally. As long as you doubt yourself, their script stays safe and unchallenged. Machiavelli once said, "If you want stability, keep people dependent on you." For manipulators, your weakness is not a problem, it is insurance. Your confusion ensures they stay needed. Your fear ensures they stay central. Your emotional dependence becomes the silent contract that protects their influence. Notice how certain people respond when you try to improve yourself. When you set boundaries, they call you selfish or ungrateful. When you become calmer, they say you are becoming cold or strange. When you say no, they remind you of everything they did for you. These reactions are not random. They are defense mechanisms against losing control. Your growth threatens the invisible hierarchy they enjoy. If you become emotionally stable, they cannot rescue you anymore. If you gain knowledge, they cannot impress you with basic information. If you trust your own judgment, they cannot guide every decision. For them, your progress feels like a personal attack on their importance. There is another layer, much darker and quieter. Some people unconsciously test if your old weakness still exists. They bring up old topics that once made you feel small. They remind you of past mistakes that used to break your confidence. They use subtle jokes, soft criticism, or familiar emotional triggers to check something. They want to know if you are still the same dependent version of yourself. This is not always a clear plan in their mind. Many manipulators are driven by emotional habits, not conscious strategy. They feel sudden irritation when you show confidence. They feel uneasy when you stay calm. Their discomfort pushes them to pull you back into the old pattern. They might even say they are only worried about you or protecting you. But inside, they are protecting the structure where you remain emotionally below them. Albert Bandura once said, "If behavior repeats, someone is rewarding it from somewhere." If you keep shrinking around certain people, look for the hidden reward. Maybe they give you extra attention only when you feel broken. Maybe they become kind only when you admit you are weak. Maybe they listen deeply only when you confess fear and self-hate. Your mind learns a dangerous rule: vulnerability brings care, strength brings distance. This rule is how emotional draining begins. You start returning to weakness because it feels safer than strength. You begin to associate your own growth with loneliness or conflict. You notice that every time you act strong, someone becomes cold or critical. Every time you act helpless, they become warm, supportive, and involved. Slowly, your nervous system learns that being small keeps the relationship peaceful. Manipulators build a loop where your weakness feeds their emotional needs. They feel important, wise, or morally superior when you struggle. They may complain that you never listen, yet they secretly enjoy correcting you. They may say they want you strong, yet they relax when you break down. Their words support your growth, but their reactions punish it. You rarely see this pattern clearly at first. You only feel tired after interactions. Your mind feels crowded and heavy. You start doubting decisions that felt clear before speaking to them. You delay your goals because you hear their imagined criticism in your head. You replay their comments at night, asking yourself if you are too much. This is not normal concern. This is psychological control through emotional exhaustion. There is another secret. Your growth threatens their comfort with their own flaws. When you work on your habits, they feel exposed for ignoring theirs. When you heal your wounds, their unhealed pain feels sharper beside you. When you seek knowledge, their laziness or stagnation becomes harder to justify. Your improvement acts like a mirror, showing them what they refuse to face. Instead of growing with you, they try to dim you until they feel normal again. So they use subtle techniques to keep you in place. They minimize your achievements, saying many people do more than you. They magnify your mistakes, repeating them as proof you are not ready. They question your motives, suggesting you are changing only for attention. They compare you with others, always placing you slightly below an invisible standard. These tactics are not about truth, they are about control over your self-image. Dark psychology works through repetition, not volume. It rarely needs shouting, it uses small comments injected over long time. Your mind slowly reorganizes around their feedback, believing it is your own voice. You stop asking what you want and start asking what will keep them calm. When that happens, your reactions are no longer fully yours, they are trained. The most dangerous part is this: they can appear supportive on the surface. They may celebrate your progress publicly, while undermining it privately with small doubts. They might praise you in front of others, then question you when you are alone. They keep you unsure about their true position, so you stay emotionally dependent. You keep seeking their approval for each step, afraid of losing their validation. So you must ask a difficult question inside yourself. Who becomes uncomfortable when you respect yourself more? Who becomes distant when you become emotionally independent? Who only feels close to you when you are confused or broken? If the same people appear every time, then something deeper is happening. You never noticed how your growth exposes hidden contracts inside your relationships. These contracts were written without words, written through repeated emotional exchanges. Someone agreed to feel powerful as long as you agreed to feel doubtful. Someone agreed to feel stable as long as you carried the chaos inside. Now the real tension begins. If these contracts exist, what happens when you finally refuse to sign them? Oh, think distance protects you from manipulation, but it only protects their strategy. Your silence does not break their influence, it only hides it deeper inside you. If you want to understand why your growth threatens them, watch how they react to your clarity. The moment you begin to think for yourself, a psychological shift occurs. Your mind stops following the emotional script they have repeated for years. Their power never lived in your weakness, it lived in your confusion. The more clarity you gain, the less access they have to your emotional center. Clarity is the one thing manipulators fear, because it dissolves influence without conflict. Machiavelli once said, if control is threatened, increase fear, not force. A manipulator rarely uses direct aggression, they use subtle anxiety. They introduce doubt where you felt certain, they introduce hesitation where you felt stable. They push small emotional triggers that lead you back into old patterns of insecurity. They want your mind to believe that growth brings danger, but weakness brings safety. You must notice the invisible mechanisms that operate under their words. Every emotional drainer uses 3 psychological pillars to control your growth. First is emotional inconsistency. They are warm when you are weak and distant when you are strong. Second is selective validation. They approve only the versions of you that serve their comfort. Third is controlled encouragement. They support progress that does not surpass their own limits. These pillars create a silent rule: rise but never rise too high. When you start improving your life, watch how their tone shifts. Your goals suddenly become unrealistic. Your boundaries become dramatic. Your confidence becomes arrogance. They blur the line between your true growth and imagined danger. If you become calm, they say you are shutting people out. If you say no, they say you are becoming rigid. If you distance yourself from negativity, they say you are acting superior. Each statement pulls you back into a smaller version of yourself. Albert Bandura once said, if someone shapes your environment, they shape your choices. Manipulators do not control you directly, they control the atmosphere around you. They create guilt around independence, making you fear losing connection. They create shame around confidence, making you fear becoming unlikable. They create anxiety around clarity, making you fear making the wrong decision. They build an emotional environment where your growth feels like self-betrayal. Notice how they observe you, not to understand you but to measure you. They scan your reactions to find which comments tighten your chest. They repeat the doubts that silence your voice, the ones that shrink your confidence. They mirror disappointment to punish your independence, even without saying a word. Their body language delivers the same message again and again. Return to the old you. Your mind learns these messages through emotional memory, not logic. You start adjusting your words to avoid their subtle disapproval. You start shrinking your achievements because their discomfort feels heavy. You avoid expressing new ideas because their silence feels like rejection. Your nervous system begins to prioritize their comfort over your growth. This is how emotional draining becomes an internal habit, not an external event. Some people rely on your weakness because it hides their own insecurities. Your uncertainty makes their flaws invisible. Your dependence makes their failures irrelevant. When you improve yourself, you unintentionally expose the parts of them they avoid. Your discipline exposes their inconsistency. Your healing exposes their denial. Your emotional stability reveals the depth of their chaos. So they try to dim you before your growth becomes a mirror they cannot handle. Their mind creates a hidden fear. If you evolve too much, you will see the truth. You will notice the manipulation, the emotional pressure, the inconsistency. You will realize they never wanted you small for your good, only for their comfort. And once you see this clearly, their control collapses completely. So they try to stop clarity before clarity stops them. Dark psychology uses a method called emotional anchoring. They tie your confidence to their approval, so you cannot rise without them. They tie your decisions to their reactions, so you cannot act freely. They tie your peace to their mood, so your stability never belongs to you. This anchoring keeps you questioning yourself even when no one is speaking. You think you are thinking independently, but their voice lives inside your mind. It repeats as self-doubt, hesitation, overthinking, constant fear of disappointing someone. Every time you choose growth, you hear their imagined criticism. Every time you choose peace, you hear their imagined disappointment. This is not your mind speaking, this is emotional programming. The truth is simple but painful. Your growth threatens the system they built around you. You were never meant to rise too high, because your rise breaks their narrative. You stop being the one who needs them, and they start becoming the one who fears loss. Your independence forces them to confront their reasons for staying close. Without your weakness, they lose their purpose, their identity, their emotional control. So the real question begins here. If your clarity scares them this much, what happens when you choose power over approval? You feel like setting boundaries protects you, but it only awakens deeper opposition. You believe avoiding conflict spares your mind, yet it often triggers silent retaliation. If someone is threatened by your stability, their next move is not obvious until you watch carefully. There is a hidden blueprint behind emotional draining, and it advances exactly when you assert your limits. You imagine the conflict would show itself, but what actually happens is far subtler. The manipulator doesn't raise their voice, they raise your inner tension. They don't demand your obedience, they demand your comfort in obeying. They shift their strategy when you begin to say no. Observe the pattern. You decide to protect your energy, they respond with unexpected calm. They stop pushing overtly, instead they stop responding at all. They withdraw the warmth that once soaked you in familiarity. Your phone stays silent, the texts become brief, the tone becomes templated. This is not neutrality. It is measuring your reaction, awaiting your instability. Why would withdrawal be a weapon? Because it forces you to question yourself. You begin wondering, what did I do wrong? Why is there quiet instead of conversation? This silence undercuts your confidence, because you feel unseen, unimportant, and unsure of your value. Manipulators know this. They know that silence breeds self-doubt faster than criticism. Albert Bandura once said that someone who shapes your environment shapes your choices. Your emotional environment is being shaped when your boundary produces cold vacuum instead of dialogue. You might interpret their silence as innocent or give it the benefit of the doubt. That is exactly the intention. You are thrown off your axis while thinking the pause is your kindness. Now consider the next move in their strategy: reverse reinforcement. When your boundary stands firm, they begin to reward the version of you who steps back. They praise you for being understanding, for being reasonable, for being less confrontational. This reward isn't about your authentic state, it's about policing your growth. They reinforce the small you, the agreeable you, the version that remains within their emotional territory. Manipulation tactics research lists guilt tripping and gaslighting as core methods used by emotional controllers. Healthline, +2, Bay Area CBT Center. +2, the withdrawal and reward system fits into those patterns. You are made to feel guilty for being firm, and you are rewarded when you revert. You might feel proud of your boundary, but then you feel unbalanced when the person avoids you and the energy drops. You might expect confrontation, but instead you get silence, a far stronger threat to stability than words. There is another layer you need to recognize, the strategic use of your memory and habit loops. They do not just change behavior, they rewrite the emotional settings you unconsciously return to. When you raise a limit, they push you back into the familiar, weak version of yourself by making your mind reopen old discomforts. You remember all the times you gave in, all the times you apologized, all the times you were told you were too sensitive. Your nervous system starts believing the safe zone is that old version, not the one who stands firm. Machiavelli once said, if people are conditioned to depend on you, they will fear your freedom. In this context, if you depend on their emotional availability, you fear your own freedom. They weaponize your dependence, not by dramatic hostility, but by erasing themselves when you act differently. And your courage to stay different becomes the part they fight against. You must watch out for the threefold sequence of reaction. Boundary, right arrow, silence, right arrow, reward for retreat. When you see this sequence, you are witnessing a system of emotional control at work. Your discomfort is not merely personal, it is structural, built into the way someone uses your growth against them. Your mind starts measuring the pain of change rather than the gain. You begin counting what you lose instead of what you create. It is here you start feeling drained, not because you gave too much, but because your energy is redirected into managing their response. You monitor their tone, you wait for the message. You interpret the pause, your growth becomes hostage to their reaction. You are not weak, you are plugged into their emotional engine without realizing. Recognizing this pattern is your turning point. Your next question must be, are you willing to subscribe to silence in order to maintain peace? Are you willing to wait for their approval before you feel stable? Because if the answer is yes, then your growth remains boxed in. So what happens when you refuse the entire threefold sequence and instead continue anyway, on your terms? You think resisting their silence will bring clarity, but it only exposes their deeper patterns. You believe your calmness will end the pressure, yet calmness is the very thing they cannot tolerate. If your stability removes their control, their strategies evolve into something far more calculated. The moment you refuse the silence trap, you trigger the next level of psychological resistance. They realize you are no longer responding to emotional withdrawal, so they shift to narrative control. Instead of silence, they begin shaping how you view yourself, your choices, and your growth. They attempt to rewrite the meaning of your progress, turning strength into defect and clarity into rebellion. Every manipulator has a hidden blueprint that activates when their influence begins to collapse. At this stage, their goal is not to break your boundary, but to make you doubt the intention behind it. They want you confused about whether your growth is genuine or ego-driven. They want you unsure if your boundary was protection or immaturity. They want you questioning the morality of your own emotional independence. Machiavelli once said, if direct power fails, reshape the story around the opponent. So they reshape the story around you. They frame your confidence as overreaction, your independence as coldness, your clarity as arrogance. They use soft phrases disguised as concern, such as you are changing too fast or you are becoming distant. These phrases are not observations, they are psychological anchors designed to pull you back. Now notice the next tactic, emotional inversion. This method flips the roles entirely, making you appear as the one causing disruption. When you maintain distance, they say you are isolating yourself. When you express truth, they say you are being harsh. When you prioritize your mental health, they claim you no longer care. Each inversion forces you to defend yourself instead of holding your boundary. And every time you defend yourself, you return to the emotional ground they control. This is the hidden brilliance of narrative manipulation. It shifts focus from their behavior to your reaction. The more you explain yourself, the more influence they regain without appearing aggressive. Albert Bandura once said, if someone controls interpretation, they control behavior. Manipulators understand this instinctively. They don't need to change your actions. They only need to change the meaning attached to your actions. Once the meaning shifts, your confidence shakes from within. Your mind begins internal conflict, questioning whether you are becoming the villain in the story they created. Emotional drainers thrive on this internal conflict because it keeps you unstable without external force. The conflict you feel is precisely the evidence that their system still works. You fight yourself, not them. You apologize to restore balance. You soften your boundary to avoid guilt. You shrink your growth to reduce tension. But there is one more layer that stays invisible until you look closely, the loyalty test. This test is designed to see whether you stay committed to your new strength or return to familiar weakness. They provoke small triggers, subtle criticism, slight disappointment. They watch whether you stand firm or collapse. They study whether your silence is peaceful confidence or fearful avoidance. Every reaction becomes data for their next move. What you must understand is simple. Your growth destabilizes not only their control, but also their identity. If you change, their old emotional role becomes useless. The helper can no longer rescue you. The guider can no longer direct you. The critic can no longer correct you. The superior can no longer stay above you. Your improvement dethrones every version of them built around your old self. This is why they react not to your words, but to your evolution. You are not threatening them with aggression, you are threatening them with independence. Your growth removes the psychological currency they used to feel secure. You erase the emotional landscape where they once felt powerful. Dark psychology thrives on predictable insecurity, but collapses under unpredictable stability. When you remain consistent, calm, detached from old triggers, they lose the map. They cannot predict your reaction, and unpredictability makes influence impossible. So the system pushes harder, using emotional arguments, subtle blame, reinterpreting your growth as a problem. Because if they can convince you that staying small is safer, they win without force. They only need to make you doubt your own evolution once. One moment of regret, one wave of guilt, one internal collapse. But the real twist is this: they are not fighting your boundary, they are fighting your new identity. And if they lose the battle with your identity, they lose the ability to shape your emotional world forever. So ask yourself this now: if they cannot handle your transformation, what happens when you finally become someone they can no longer measure or manipulate? You believe their pressure will fade when the truth becomes clear, but clarity only sharpens their fear. You assume the conflict will ease once you stand firm, yet firmness is the very signal that their influence is dying. If your stability threatens their control, their psychology shifts into its most revealing and dangerous stage. This stage is where emotional drainers activate the oldest mechanism in the human mind: identity disruption. They do not need to attack your growth if they can attack the self that created it. Their goal becomes simple: disconnect you from the version of yourself that refuses manipulation. They aim to confuse you about who you are becoming, not what you are doing. You will notice a sudden increase in subtle psychological projections. They start describing feelings you never expressed, motives you never had, behaviors you never displayed. They speak as if they know your inner world better than you do. Their confidence forces you to pause, their tone forces you to reconsider. And in that hesitation, your new identity becomes vulnerable. Machiavelli once said, if you cannot control action, influence belief. So they influence your belief about yourself. They claim you are acting differently for the wrong reasons. They claim your detachment is emotional immaturity. They claim your silence is avoidance, not clarity. Each claim is a seed meant to weaken the roots of your evolving identity. When these seeds enter your mind, your thoughts begin to collide. You start asking yourself questions you never asked before. Am I actually being unfair? Am I becoming too defensive? Am I losing my compassion? These questions feel like self-reflection, but they are psychological infections planted to shrink your growth. Albert Bandura once said that identity forms through repeated reactions to social pressure. Manipulators apply pressure repeatedly until your sense of self bends in their direction. They criticize you in the exact tone that once shaped your old identity, the one they benefited from. They recreate emotional environments that feel strangely familiar, pulling your mind back toward who you were. This is the stage where emotional exhaustion peaks. You feel the weight of constant introspection, constant second-guessing, constant pressure to justify your evolution. Your internal world becomes louder than your external progress. You spend more energy managing your thoughts than moving forward. You begin confusing your new strength with instability because someone taught you to see it that way. But the real danger appears in their next strategy, emotional distortion. This tactic alters the emotional meaning behind your actions until your mind feels misaligned. You express calmness, they frame it as coldness. You express truth, they frame it as aggression. You express boundaries, they frame it as ego. You express confidence, they frame it as detachment. This distortion changes how you emotionally interpret yourself. Your brain begins associating your own growth with negative emotions. Your inner system becomes conflicted because strength feels wrong and weakness feels safe. This confusion is not accidental. It is engineered to return you to the version that was predictable. Then comes the next twist, emotional mirroring. They reflect your growth back to you in a distorted form. If you become stable, they become unstable. If you become confident, they become offended. If you become silent, they become dramatic. If you pull away, they pull guilt forward. This mirror punishes your progress by attaching emotional consequences to it. Dark psychology functions like a psychological maze. You take one step forward, but the walls shift around you. You gain stability, but someone rearranges the meaning of that stability. You rise higher, but someone lowers the ceiling. You evolve, but someone tries to shrink the identity that controls your evolution. The deeper truth is this: your growth is not harming them, it is exposing them. It exposes their dependence on your old patterns. It exposes their comfort in your uncertainty. It exposes their fear of being equal instead of superior. And most importantly, it exposes their inability to maintain a relationship without control. When a manipulator senses they are losing emotional influence, they attack the foundation you are building inside yourself. Because if that foundation becomes stable, they lose all access to your mind. And once they lose access to your mind, their power becomes irrelevant. So the question that now stands before you is unavoidable. If they cannot destroy your growth, will they try to destroy your self-perception instead? You think the final battle happens outside you, but it always happens inside your mind. You believe defeating manipulation requires confrontation, yet the real victory is something much quieter. If your growth threatens the system built around your weakness, the final move is meant to break your inner foundation. When everything else fails, emotional drainers activate the most hidden mechanism of all, psychological regression. Their final strategy is not to attack your progress, but to lure you back into the emotional version of yourself they once controlled. They want you to step backward voluntarily, because forced control never lasts, but chosen weakness lasts forever. This regression is triggered through familiar emotional cues. You will notice old patterns resurfacing without warning. Old insecurities rise again, old fears feel sharper, old doubts echo louder. Your mind replays past mistakes with unnecessary intensity, as if someone turned up the volume. You begin to feel like the older version of yourself, the one who struggled to stand firm. Machiavelli once said, "If you cannot defeat strength, revive the enemy's old fear." So manipulators revive the fears they know once controlled you. They remind you of failures you outgrew. They mention qualities you fixed long ago. They question decisions you already overcame. Each reminder tries to reopen doors you spent years closing. You might notice a strange emotional pull toward who you used to be. You feel safer shrinking than expanding. You feel safer apologizing than asserting. You feel safer surrendering than standing firm. Your mind mistakes familiarity for safety, not realizing it is walking into its old cage again. This is why the final stage of manipulation feels like confusion rather than conflict. You cannot see an opponent, only your own thoughts battling each other. You question if your progress is temporary. You wonder if your clarity was an illusion. You fear becoming someone who disappoints others simply by evolving. This internal chaos is not coincidence, it is engineered. Albert Bandura once said that self-belief collapses fastest when emotional pressure comes from familiar sources. Manipulators know this instinctively. They use your history with them to amplify self-doubt, making the new identity feel unstable. They try to convince your nervous system that the old path was safer, even if it was destructive. You must remember something crucial. Regression is not proof that you failed. It is proof that you are close to breaking the cycle. Manipulators always intensify when they sense the end of their influence. Their pressure increases because their control is evaporating. Their tactics escalate because their system is collapsing. Their emotional weight becomes heavier because you are finally strong enough to lift it. The turning point comes when you stop trying to win their approval and start reclaiming your internal authority. You stop explaining your decisions. You stop defending your boundaries. You stop shrinking for comfort. You stop doubting your evolution. Your growth becomes silent, steady, and independent of external reaction. This is where their power breaks. Manipulation cannot operate without your emotional response. Control cannot survive when clarity becomes your default state. Influence cannot thrive when you stop negotiating with guilt. The psychological trap collapses the moment you realize one truth. Your growth was never the problem, their dependence on your weakness was. Your clarity was never dangerous, their fear of losing influence was. Your boundaries were never selfish, their identity relied on your lack of them. Their final tactic fails when you understand a simple rule. Someone who fears your evolution was never aligned with your well-being. Someone who feels threatened by your strength was never contributing to it. Someone who relies on your weakness cannot join you in your growth. Dark psychology loses its power when you choose your identity over their approval. When you stop performing the older version of yourself. When you stop accepting emotional meanings they assign to your actions. When you stop letting someone else define the limits of your strength. The system they built around your weakness is fragile. It collapses the moment you stop participating. So now ask yourself the final question. If this entire structure depended on your weakness, what becomes possible the moment you refuse to be weak for anyone again?